Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of Runetalker. I'm Maitland, joined as always by Simon.
Hi, everyone.
We've got a very exciting episode planned for this week. So it is the first week of Empires of the Ascended is in the bag, and we are going to review our top 5 new decks for this patch. Not necessarily the top 5 strongest decks for this patch, although, to be honest, it's not far off. Like the new decks are really they're competing with the old staples. The old staples didn't get super nerfed. There was a bit of a nerf to Aphelios, but as far as an expansion goes, like this is one of the best expansions I've played. I'm enjoying it so much. All the new cards feel like they're really competing, and the new decks and strategies I'm really enjoying. And just I'm loving every game. How are you liking the new expansion?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Riot have done just a great job with this expansion. And like you said, so many new strategies feel playable, but at the same time, they feel like new strategies. They don't necessarily feel like, power creep is the reason why these cards are playable. So I think, Riot's done a pretty good job on this patch. And I've just had a blast playing. I've been laddering a lot, and I'm looking forward to laddering some more.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Riot has done really well, which I feel like Hearthstone never grasped, was making the region feel specific to that region and that expansion. Like every time a Hearthstone expansion dropped, I just felt like any card in that expansion could be from any other expansion, and I wouldn't blink. But I don't feel like that. I feel like the regions have real identity and the expansions have a real identity, and I get that through playing. Even I'm not someone that is dredging through the lore of Runeterra League, but I get that feeling, which I think is important to get to give your players through osmosis, basically.
Yeah, agreed. It just feels really cool. I like the general themes of the new region, the sort of vulnerability theme of being out in the desert, that sort of thing. And they've done a good job with it.
Yeah, there is one criticism I would have is around the champion level up animations, where I really like some of the new ones. What I've found, though, is that the champion level up animations of the champions in my deck, I really like. I really enjoy. They're really sort of powerful and resonant. They feel like great moments. But then the champion level ups in my opponent's deck, I'm not a fan of. I just feel like, oh no, this is terrible. I'm losing this game. Help. And so maybe Riot could take that one on board. And, I don't have a suggestion, but that's just some feedback from me as an invested player.
Yeah, no, definitely. It does feel like, on a more serious note, some of the animations do feel a bit long. The Sivir animation in particular, when you're watching that, you feel like you could maybe step away from the computer for a second. It is cool though, so.
Yeah, well, the problem with the one like Sivir as well is that it happens at a critical time where they pass priority. The Twisted Fate one takes a long time, but normally when it happens, your opponent has priority and is about to do things. Whereas when Sivir's triggers, it's because they've just dealt a heap of damage to you, or they're attacking, and it's you're waiting to try and not be dead, or you probably are dead. Severe flippings, it's rough. It's a lot of damage that's been dealt to you.
Definitely.
So today we're going to talk about, as we said, our top 5 decks, new decks in the Shreema expansion. All the lists will be in the show notes. We're going to go over what we think, what we like about the decks, how they work, which ones we'd recommend, and which ones have been our favorites to play. And we're going to talk about much else this ep. I think that's going to take up a lot of time because I've got a lot to say about these decks. Like I said, I've been really enjoying them, and the Shreema is just a super fun region.
Yeah, definitely. Really fun region. Pretty fun to play against as well, which is always nice.
Yeah, all right. So let's get stuck into it with Lissandra Trundle. And so Lissandra's been a bit of a versatile unit, as we obviously expected in our... ever since she was spoiled, she just does so much. She's got so much going on. As expected, she's being slotted into a lot of different shells. But the one that we think is doing the best and is one of the most played decks this expansion, and probably the strongest one, is just piggybacking off the existing Shadow Isles control strategies, utilizing all these powerful cards like Withering Wail and Avalanche, which have just been so strong in the meta at the moment, as well as powerful single target removal like Vengeance to give you enough time, and also Lissandra helps to give you enough time to get to the late stage of the game where you're able to then do some new combo-rific things with Spectral Matron to put into play the Watcher, and you've got other options with some lists are running Fading Memories, which gives you more Watchers or more Spectral Matrons or more Trundle Pillars to trigger Lissandra. It can actually do quite a bit in this list. I even used it just before we started casting to copy one of my... I didn't have a 3-drop, so I copied one of my opponent's units so that I didn't eat a huge attack. So Fading Memories has really picked up a lot of value this expansion. But yeah, this deck is... It's sort of like the new evolution of FTR. You're being a control game early, and then you've got a bit of a combo finish, and it's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it's just a really strong deck. It has all those sort of core control pieces. And one reason why it has sort of taken over compared to a deck like Feel the Rush is that, you know, your combo operates mostly through creatures, or burst spells. So you don't run into Deny or Rite of Negation, which could really blow you out if you're, you know, setting up for one key turn. So I think that's a really big strength of the win condition in the deck.
Yeah, definitely, and that it's also less reliant on ramp spells than previous FTR versions. Some lists aren't even running Catalyst. I haven't played enough with it myself to know if I am pro Catalyst or anti Catalyst, but the list we've included in the show notes from Austin has Catalyst at the moment. But there's a lot of different builds. There's also a Ionia build which drops the Shadow Isles for Ionia, which is really good in the mirror. It's really good at beating this deck. But I think that in general for ladder play and probably for tournament play as well at large, I think the Shadow Isles version is going to end up being the strongest. Similar, FTR also had an Ionia version which had some slightly different matchups, but overall the matchup spread for the SI version I think is going to be stronger.
Yeah, agreed. And at the moment, it's really, got all of those goodies that you need to prey on the aggro decks that people tend to run the first few weeks of a new meta. So Withering Wail just destroys something like discard aggro. You have a bunch of different ways to heal. You also have 3 copies of Avalanche and 3 copies of Blighted Ravine. So you essentially have, 6 copies of Avalanche, which can be really strong in some matchups. And then the deck is also running the box at the moment as well. So you've got a lot of these small damage sweepers. The box is particularly good against TF Fizz, because a lot of the time on their big Burblefish turn, you have no idea how many copies of Burblefish, how many copies of the copier unit, give it +1/+1.
Iterative improvement
that they have in their hand. So it can be really difficult to sit there and decide, okay, do I Avalanche now? And, you use your Avalanche and then they play 2 more Burblefish and you take a huge hit, or, you don't play your Avalanche and they attack you with what's on board. So the box really gets around that issue because they are so incentivized to put all of their units into play on one turn. So, and if they don't do that, you just get to clean up the rest with an Avalanche later on anyway. So the box is a really good piece of tech for that matchup. But as that matchup, hopefully fades away in the next patch, I'm expecting some big nerfs hitting that deck, then I could see this list moving away from pieces like the box.
Yeah, like you said, TF Fizz, to the surprise of no one, was untouched at the end of the last expansion, and so it's quickly risen as people get over the new toys syndrome and start to just want to win and climb ladder up. A lot of people have been picking that up, and it's one of the most played and highest win rate decks, and so yeah, I think it's probably about time that Twisted Fate took a bit of a hit. He's been a meta staple for a long time, and yeah, it's probably just a bit too much now. And so I think that'll be getting a hit. But if you are seeing a lot of that deck and you're wanting to beat it, then this is a fantastic place to be, because you will not lose often to that deck with this lineup.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing that I just wanted to comment on about one of the biggest strengths of the win conditions in this deck. You're not playing the Watcher. You're not playing this huge unit that might get stuck in your hand or might be difficult to play. You've got Lissandra, which is this great 3-drop unit, which can sometimes make you an 8/8, rarely. And it also gives you this win condition in your hand when it levels up. So you end up with this really, flexible card that does a lot of things for you. And I think that's one of the big strengths of Lissandra and one of the reasons why this deck has been so successful.
Yeah, there's been some comments on Twitter, and obviously the set's still new. People are still getting used to things, and so there'll be complaints about certain things. And one of those things is the Watcher, and people, which has got obviously a huge splashy effect. It wins the game when it attacks, and so there's definitely been some complaints around that. And I'm not really sure if I feel like it's problematic at the moment. I was saying to Simon before that I'm 5-0 with this deck today, and I haven't cast the Watcher once. It's not the only option that you have to win. You still can just strangle out aggro decks resources and win with one with just a spectral matron beating down in one of the games.
Nice.
And so like, I don't know, the Watcher, obviously it's a powerful card. It attacks and obliterates your deck. That's very powerful, but there's a lot of ways to interact with it, and like if your deck is unable to deal 20 damage through a control deck or stop, it's just an 11-17 unit, like if you're unable to stop that from attacking, then, like is that really a huge constraint on the game? They've got to jump through a lot of hoops to get it out, and you've got a lot of warning that it's going to happen, and there's a lot of ways to stun the unit, kill the unit. I don't know. I feel like attacking with a big unit and losing the game is pretty reasonable at this stage. And what this deck is doing just doesn't feel busted to me.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens as they start to refine the list as well. If it's just one Watcher coming down, that can be easy to deal with. But if they're at a point where, the Watcher costs 0, they can Fading Memories, get some extra 0-cost copies in hand, and really attack you that way. That could be an issue, but like we'll have to see. The way the deck is built at the moment, you really just have all these pieces. You can really lose to yourself as well. It's definitely one of those decks where you just draw copies of the box and copies of Vile Feast in the mirror, for instance, or against a mid-range or slightly bigger deck, and there's just not that much you can do, and you just kind of lose. So it's definitely a deck that the more it focuses on those combo aspects, the more it's going to lose to itself.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, like I said, it's a very powerful card, the Watcher. And so, like I said, I could imagine a situation where it ends up being like, okay, this does need to be nerfed. It's too strong. But I definitely haven't. Like I said before, I've had my deck obliterated once so far this expansion, and so it doesn't feel like it's. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons Lissandra is powerful, and that's certainly one of them. But I'm not feeling like it's oppressive at the moment. I certainly haven't been running to Twitter to complain about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is strong, and it can pressure your opponent's resources. But yeah. Also something to keep in mind for listeners who might not have played against the deck yet. So the Watcher obliterates your deck on attacks, but you don't lose the game until the next time you try and draw a card. So if you have a champion in play and you cast another champion spell, your deck will go back to having one card in it. Another way I've seen this come up is with the Messenger's Sigil that puts 5 copies of the Messenger in your deck. I've had that be made off Burblefish, and you can make that on turn 5 or 6 and decide, okay, I'm going to hold this just in case they obliterate my deck so I can refill it.
Yeah, and same with Go Hard. You can hold a copy of Go Hard so that when your opponent obliterates your deck, you cast it to get some more copies in there. There's a few ways to keep on going after your deck's been obliterated, and then you just have to deal with an 11-17.
Yeah, which is a whole other issue.
Yeah, and another thing sort of worth having a bit of a chat about is Blighted Ravine, which ended up being better than I think both of us expected. And what are your thoughts on why do you think this card is better than we thought it first looked?
I think it's lining up reasonably well in the meta at the moment. So week 1, there have been a lot of aggro decks. Some earlier iterations of this deck were also playing the Ledros Atrocity combo as their main finisher, and Blighted Ravine gets the opponent to 18 life. So I think that's partly why it saw some more play. But I think, at the moment, these lists are just running, as many sweepers as they can. You've got 3 Avalanches, 3 Withering Whales, 2 copies of the box, and 3 Blighted Ravine. There's 1 Ruination in there as well, but, people are mostly moving away from those bigger, more mid-range answers. So, if you want to run every single sweeper, then, you should definitely be running Blighted Ravine.
Yeah, and it's definitely one that people just need to get a few more reps with, and it's it's a bit funky, the exact timing of it, and I've definitely had some opponents. Just one opponent this morning had a LeBlanc out, and I played Blighted Ravine, and then they played Shapestone to try and get it to 3 toughness outside of Blighted Ravine, and that's unfortunately not how it works, because at the end of the turn,
done that.
yeah, it shrinks back down, and then they take the 2 damage, and that was they had a sad emote for that one, and the exact timing of it. I've also had the drawing for, like, pick a card. You draw cards before this triggers, and so I haven't seen this happen. I've seen, like, the animation happen, so I'm pretty sure that if you pick a card and have TF, and they have Blighted Ravine, and you untap, and the 4 cards you draw for the turn are going to flip TF, that your TF will live through Blighted Ravine, which isn't how I'd expect it to work. I wouldn't have expected countdown to happen after you draw cards, but that seems to be based on animations how it works, but I haven't confirmed that.
Yeah, definitely one to confirm, but that's an interesting one. Because, I was thinking that Blighted Ravine is also a way for you. Sometimes you just can't avalanche on a certain board. Your opponent might have 2 units out already, but if you avalanche, your shields are down, they can play a Twisted Fate and start going off. But, Blighted Ravine is a way to get around that. You can, I can deal with your board and you can't play a TF this turn, and then I'm going to have mana again. So I think that's also a strength of Blighted Ravine at the moment in the Twisted Fate dominated world.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real push and pull tension you find when you play decks like this, where your opponent has a board that you have to deal with, but they have full mana. And so if you deal with that board, they will further develop. And then this is on your attack turn. And then they'll untap and open attack. And so that's a real, do I avalanche and kill these 3 creatures, but then they'll play 3 more creatures? Or do I let them untap and hit me for 10 damage? But Blighted Ravine lets you play Blighted Ravine. Your opponent can't further commit this turn, and then next turn they have to commit before attacking, in which case you can then use another sorcery speed removal spell slow spell to take out their new attackers. So it lets you really change the pace of the game in ways that control decks couldn't do historically. Yeah,
agreed. And I think that flexibility as well, by having Avalanche and Blighted Ravine, just is one of the reasons why people are running so many copies.
And it goes through spell shields. Unbelievable.
I had no idea, but Blighted Ravine, when it triggers, I was expecting it to pop a Sivir's spell shield, but instead that Sivir took 2 damage.
It makes Sivir hard to deal with. I struggle with Sivir.
Yeah, definitely. She's definitely one of those champs that we're gonna have to get used to beating.
Yeah, I was playing a deck last night. I'm trying to look through my deck list and think what it was. And I was going to message someone in our group chat and just say, how do you beat... So I played like 3 Sivir decks in a row, and I just... it was the Swain Lissandra list, which has been popping up as being quite popular. And I just couldn't figure out how to kill Sivir, because I had to use a spell. You can't really use abilities to pop spell shield. You have to use a spell to pop the spell shield. And then the only way to deal with like a 3 toughness creature is basically to use 2 other spells, either to like damage it and then guillotine it, or to double Death's Hand it. I just couldn't figure out how to kill Sivir without using 3 different spells.
Yeah.
And it was because also all your creatures aren't really big enough. Like Swain's your only real creature until you get to like Swain and then Leviathan. The only creatures big enough to block it. It was a nightmare. So that was like I went off that deck pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's completely fair.
But so I think Lissandra Trundle is probably a tier 1 deck at the moment. I don't think you can go too wrong playing. I think it's definitely worth picking up, trying out some different builds, because there's a lot of different builds, and getting a feel for what its matchups are, because it's really strong on the ladder. You're going to see a lot of it, and so it's important to understand, like Simon was saying, the play patterns, particularly with when are you safe and what should you be worried about, because we were playing a game that we thought we were 100% to win the other day, and then Fading Memories came out of nowhere to just absolutely destroy us. And it's important to understand those different play patterns, because you will see this in upcoming tournaments and upcoming ladder play, and it will be one that you'll want to consider putting in your lineups.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to another new deck. This one has been everywhere. There's been a lot of different Azir builds that people have been trying, with just a host of different champions. It's actually absurd how versatile Azir seems to be, but Azir Lucian, I think, has pretty clearly been the prevailing best build. Azir's really breathed new life into Lucian, and they just work together. The synergy in this shell is pretty incredible, and it's got such aggressive starts. It applies so much pressure and doesn't really relent. How have you found, because you've played quite a bit of this deck, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. So this is the deck on the list that I've probably played the most. So I played this maybe 30 games. I went from Diamond 4 to Diamond 2 with the list before swapping over to something else. I think it's a really strong aggro deck from the new set. I think it does some powerful things that other aggro decks aren't really doing. So it lets you fight on a unique axis. So for instance, it's not that weak to cards like Withering Wail, like a deck like Discard Aggro might be. It's not necessarily that weak to the sweeper effects like Avalanche or Blighted Ravine. You've got cards like Ranger's Resolve in the deck. Let's take a step back and let's just talk quickly about what's actually in the list before I dive into why it's so good. So, Lucian and Azir are your main champions. They work really well together. Lucian, when it sees 4 allies die, it transforms. Azir spits out these ephemeral tokens which are going to die. You've got Emperor's Dace, which is a landmark that when an ally attacks, you also get an attacking Sand Soldier. So you can get some really, really ridiculous starts where you play a Lucian, you play an Azir, you get a Dace down, and then let's say you play Blinding Assault to make a Valor. Suddenly, you attack with your Valor, hooking one of their units. You get 2 Sand Soldiers, 3 units have died, and then on your next attack, you attack with Lucian. You get 2 more Sand Soldiers. At this point, Lucian transforms. You also get an extra attack off the 5th Ephemeral dying. So you just really start to pop off really fast with this list. And if your opponent has, the sweeper effects and sweep up your board, Azir is a 1/5. He's really hard to kill right now. It takes multiple sweepers to deal with him. Emperor's Dace obviously can't be removed. So you just need to really stick a single unit, and at that point you can get a pretty big attack off. So you can actually out-attrition some of those swarm, avalanche removal-based decks.
Yeah, and like you said with Valor, the scout synergy is really more powerful than ever in this shell, which is why we're seeing not only Grizzled Ranger be another scout unit, but even Greathorn Companion, who's not really ventured into standard decks previously, being really an all-star in this list, and one that I just never want to see come down on my opponent's side. It's reached the lofty heights. I don't know how much you've played Greathorn Companion in Expeditions, but it is a real house there, and I'm glad to see it finally getting some time in Constructed, because there's been so many games in Expeditions where you play it and your opponent just sort of tanks, and it's just like, do I have to take 10 this turn? That's so much damage.
Yeah, it's unreal. Because, Greathorn Companion, I definitely wasn't playing with the card at first, but then I had an opponent play it against me on ladder, and I just looked at my hand and I was like, oh wow, I think I'm just dead. So this list, makes really good use of the scout mechanic. You have so many ways to get extra combat steps as well. So you run 2 copies of Relentless Pursuit. Lucian obviously gives you extra combats, and his champion spell is more copies of Relentless Pursuit. There's also a 1-of Cataclysm, which if you play it on your opponent's attack token using a scout unit, you'll get your regular attack token back. So there are some really interesting plays that you can set up. One play pattern that came up so much in this deck, so I'd really like to mention, is the Rally and Scout interaction. So essentially, Scout doesn't have to be your first attack of the turn to give you an attack token. Scout just reads the first time only Scout units attack each round, ready your attack. So a really common play is you have a flipped Lucian, you've got some Scout units, you've got a really good open attack, you take the open attack, your Lucian gives you a new attack token, and then you might decide, okay, now I'm going to develop a Greathorn Companion. Then you'll get your Scout attack off with Greathorn Companion, you'll get a regular attack token, and then you'll go for another really big attack. So keep that in mind. It comes up way more often than you'd think. And if you look for those opportunities, you can really, really punish your opponent.
Yeah, and I know that's always been in the old Scouts decks one of your favorite interactions, and it's more prevalent than ever now with like you said, Lucian flipping more than ever, Cataclysm as well, giving you more combat steps than you've ever really had, and then Azir and Emperor's Deus rewarding you for attacking as many times as possible. And so finding out ways to eke out that extra little bit of damage is just so important, and a big part of, I think, sort of like similar to these decks are the strongest when the floor is really high for how well you can play them, and then the ceiling is even higher. And I think that's where this deck is at the moment, is that playing at a base level, you'll do really well, but there's a lot of room to improve upon that with even better play and utilizing all those little edge case scenarios, particularly around Lucian is a tough card to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of really interesting, interactions with Lucian. And yeah, like you said, this deck, even at a base level, you're going to do some really strong things. You've got some just absolute, crazy opening hands. So it's really hard to have a bad opening hand with this deck.
Yeah, it molds so well.
Yeah, you'll keep Lucian, you'll keep Azir, you'll keep Emperor's Deus, you'll keep Ancient Preparations, you'll keep Dune Keeper. There are just so many pieces. And then sometimes you'll keep a single combat or a blinding assault based on the matchup. Or you might keep a shaped stone, which is the new combat trick, if you already have a landmark and a unit which can utilize it well. And yeah, you can just get off to some absolutely explosive starts and punish your opponent.
Yeah, it's sort of like an interesting snowballing effect where the more cards you have in a deck that you want to keep in your opener, the stronger that deck gets and the better it mulls. But then the sort of next level is the more cards you have that you want to keep means, there's sort of two or three tiers level of cards where there's, cards you definitely always want to keep in your opener. And then there's cards that are good in your opener in certain situations. Like, for example, you always want to keep Fiora in Fiora Shen, and I really like keeping Sharp Sight, but I can only justify keeping Sharp Sight if I already have a Fiora and or a River Shaper, for example. And so the more cards you have that you want to keep in your opener, the more it lets you keep that second level of cards that you really want access to, but you can't keep unless you have the other pieces that you need to look for. And so yeah, you can really start to sculpt out your whole turns based on your mulligan phase and just have really high consistency with this deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just one of the hidden strengths of decks like this. And yeah, when you play it and you just don't lose to yourself as often as, say, the Lissandra Trundle deck, which can definitely have opening hands where you just don't do anything. You just draw, 3 Spectral Matrons and a Ruination, or 4 Avalanche effects in the mirror. This deck, that's almost never going to happen. It's really hard to just get those hands. And if you do get those hands, you're a lot more likely to just, top deck cards that are actually good for you, because, you only really have 6 cards that are over 5 mana. So it's a lot more likely that you're going to draw, some of your earlier pieces after that.
Yeah, consistency is a really important part of the power of a deck, and something that's definitely underestimated by people. And you often play a deck, I got unlucky and had a bad draw. But by playing a deck, you are always accepting that a certain amount of your hands and draws are going to be bad. And if you play decks that have, like the Timelines control deck, for example, that we'll talk about a bit later, that have a lot more variance between their good draws and their bad draws, then that's just going to happen more often than if you play a deck like this, where your consistency is so high and there's going to be very few games, like you said, where you're just like, I just had a terrible draw and I lost.
Yeah, exactly. You'll lose because you made mistakes, which
brilliant.
Honestly, yeah. That's my preference, honestly, but
it's my precedent holistically. But then, yeah, when I make mistakes, don't love it.
Oh yeah, not a
I'd
fan.
rather
not a fan at all. Yeah, yeah.
Right,
moment, yeah, definitely.
Let's move on to one of my favorite new decks from the expansion, and I just love this deck. I think it's so cool. We're going to talk about Sivir Leblanc, and so this is basically an entirely new archetype that has been developed around the reputation mechanic. and utilizing new champions in Leblanc and Sivir, and it's really, I think it's a bit underrepresented at the moment, to be honest. I think it's just really powerful and honestly really fun to play. I find that playing this deck is much harder than, we were just saying about how high the floor for Azir Lucian is. I think the floor for LeBlanc Sivir is much, much lower, because I've played some bad games with this deck. So I know that you can play really bad with this deck, and when you do, you don't win. But yeah, I just think that the ceiling for this deck, though, is just really high. And what's the most interesting to me about it is that it sort of looks and presents like an aggressive deck, but really it's much more about it's almost control. It's about like getting sort of a couple of key pieces out and protecting them and utilizing your resources really well, because you've got a lot of cards that accomplish similar things. Like in a turn, you might want to kill a creature, and you've got Exhaust, Shapestone, Whirling Death, and Bloody Business that will all kill that creature. But it's really important that you think about, in future turns, which of these spells am I going to need to deal with other threats, and which ones are going to get less useful, and making sure that you don't use the Shapestone this turn, and then a couple of turns later, Shapestone would have been lethal. And so I've been loving this deck. I think it is just really, really fun and really interesting. A great addition to the meta.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's a really cool deck. I like the way that it sort of, can pivot. You can have those very aggressive beatdown draws, or you can play that more mid-rangey plan. And definitely once you get into the late game and you've actually activated your reputation, suddenly you've got, whispered words, you can out-card advantage your opponents, you've got access to a Rite of Negation, and you can sort of play that more controlling plan. So, the list we're linking is from Silverfuse. I think that's the list we both like the most at the moment. But, overall, it's just a versatile deck, and, it's a blast to play.
Yeah, there's definitely a few flex slots and some numbers that you can play with, but overall, I'm happy with this list. And so one of the things that's the strongest about it is the Spell Shield cards in Sivir and Ruin Runner, and Spell Shield just feels so strong at the moment. And particularly when you play it, when your opponent plays a Ruin Runner, I'm always just like hands in the air, like, what am I meant to do? This card is such a beating. It is huge.
Yeah, it's just a huge card, and it just makes so many of the other cards better as well, because normally something like a Bloody Business or a Whirling Death might be, a huge liability if your opponent could kill your creature in response and blow you out. But, with a Ruin Runner or a Sivir, it's so, so hard for them to actually do that.
Yeah, and then also, obviously, being able to use those spells to remove a blocker and trample over, with using the trample is really good as well. Also being able to do things like using Rockhopper to be able to dictate combat, and Exhaust. Exhaust is one that I think Exhaust is really underplayed at the moment. That feels just like one of the strongest cards they've ever printed to me. Giving something -2, -0 and vulnerable is just... And the focus isn't even really like that, just stops you from using it defensively. It's not really an issue for on the attack turns where you normally want to play it, but it's just, I don't know, this card just feels like such a good way to deal with so many issues at the moment, particularly, as we've said a lot, with the backline heroes that can be really hard to deal with. Exhaust just gives you a very cheap way to then utilize your 5-power quick attack champions to take out a Twisted Fate or an Aphelios or anything that's sitting back, an Azir, sitting back trying to eke out value.
Definitely. It's a really strong card. It works really well with the set's themes, and I mean, you do have the option to use it defensively at times as well. You can't use it mid-combat, but if your opponent develops and gives you an opportunity right before they've got a good attack, you can definitely use it on defense and look for those opportunities. Rockhopper is a really interesting one as well, because that's a sort of card that has what I like to call sort of hidden power. So you might play a Rockhopper, and then, your opponent plays something and makes a Sand Soldier, and you gave vulnerable to the Sand Soldier, and you might see that and think, oh man, this card sucks. Like, I just gave vulnerable to this Sand Soldier or this, 3-1 or whatever shitty, unit my opponents decided to play. But the hidden power of that card is, you don't get to see your opponent's hand. I've had it come up a heap where I've wanted to play an Aphelios, and my opponent's played a Rockhopper, and I've had to disrupt my curve and play another unit to get around that vulnerable. So I think there's a lot of power in that card that you might not necessarily see in game. So just keep that in mind and think about, what has this actually disrupted?
Yeah, it's really important with cards like this to play against them and to get a feel for how they affect games, and to not let, like you said, how you play them and how they feel when you play them to influence how you feel about them too much, because a lot of the time you don't see the full effect they're having on the game. And I've had a lot of games with Rockhopper where like I can't play my Lissandra, I can't play my Trundle because the vulnerable's permanent. And yeah, there's a lot of key creatures that you want to be playing at the moment, and creatures are a huge part of Runeterra, and not being able to develop them on key turns against a deck that's this aggressive and pressures you this much can just totally disrupt your entire game plan, particularly if you don't have the option to play a cheaper creature. There's been a lot of games where my opponent's played a Rockhopper and all I have is really important, useful creatures that I can't afford to give vulnerable, and so it's just sort of left me between a Rockhopper and a hard place. Like, God.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely, yeah. Looking at the board of multiple Rockhoppers and my Twisted Fate, like, do I red card?
Yeah.
Do I lose my TF? Yeah.
Yeah, no. But then, yeah, it's permanent. Like, they'll just get it next turn. You can't just keep chasing it forever. No, so yeah, this is, really, really liking this deck. And I don't know, I wonder if, the fact that I said, like, it's sort of got a higher skill cap than a lot of aggressive decks. I wonder if we'll see this pick up a bit more as this gets more refined, or where this will end up in the meta. But I think this is a real player for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely doing some strong things. And yeah, if the opponent, can't answer cards like Leblanc, they're going to die very quickly. I think one of the issues with this deck at the moment is I think it's got quite a bad TF Fizz matchup. I think that's actually true for a lot of decks on this list. So yeah. We'll have to see what happens after the next patch, but definitely one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, if TS Fizz gets a bit of a hit, then that'll definitely be one that I'll be looking for to pick back up and see where it sits. And as there will be, the meta will totally shift if that huge force is nerfed, and yeah, everything will change. But yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to, I guess we'll group in a bunch of Nasus Slay decks together. And so there's a lot of different versions with Nasus. There's so some of them are just purely focused on Nasus and being really aggressive with no other champions. Nasus Kindred has been seeing a lot of play as well. The one I think I like it the most, and what we get at the moment, and what we're going to link in the show notes, is Nasus Thresh, which is really cool. But essentially all of the decks are based around Nasus getting a lot of Slay triggers and then playing a big Nasus and either whacking them or atrocitying.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the list we're linking is from xxWhatAmIxx. It's really focused on the Nasus kill condition. It's got 3 copies of Atrocity, so it's leaning into that angle quite hard. It's also got a lot of units, and the plan of the deck is essentially get on board early, deal a huge chunk of damage, use cards like Blighted Caretaker to, get yourself some Slay stacks. You use Spirit Leech and Glimpse Beyond to also stack up those Slay stacks. And then you finish them off with a Nasus, which you can find off Thresh, because Thresh is flipping quite quickly at the moment. Otherwise, you get a huge Nasus, and the goal with Nasus is get a hit off with Nasus when it's got over 10 power to give it Spell Shield, and then you can feel pretty safe using an Atrocity to finish off your opponent. Oftentimes, you push so much damage through in the early game that's a pretty reliable plan. What do you think about the deck, Maitland? I think you've played it a bit more than I have.
Yeah, I really like it. And obviously Nasus is one that we weren't too high on before the expansion. But as we said at the time, I think Slay is one of those mechanics that it's just, until you get in games, it's hard to visualize how good it is. And until you see the meta, it's hard to really visualize how easy it is to get those triggers. And particularly at the moment where there's a lot of early creatures are coming down, there's a lot of Azir around. And so there's just a lot of opportunities to get those Slay triggers. And like you said, things like Blighted Caretaker have really, really started to shine in this sort of a shell. You've also got Dune Keeper, and you've just got a bunch of options to kill your own creatures with Glimpse of Beyond, and then also just be slaying your opponent's creatures just with how big your your creatures and your border. Bakai's Sand Spinner is a really cool unit to be able to give something vulnerable and be a sizable body itself and get in there. And yeah, like this particularly this version, I was really surprised at how often it became one of my go-to game plans was flipping Thresh and then attacking with Thresh, getting Nasus in, getting that hit off, and then atrocitying. And just, how quickly you were able to flip Thresh. Like, I've played Thresh a lot historically, but it's never been in decks that have this many creatures. It's always just been sort of a good control piece, using the big body and challenger to control the board, and flipping is sort of a real afterthought that very rarely happens. Whereas in this deck, you have so many units, and you're killing your units, killing your opponent's units all the time. It's almost every game, whenever you draw Thresh in your hand, that's my new game plan, is just how do I get Thresh down and flip it and then get Nasus out.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. This is a deck that really does pull some power out of Thresh and make the card a lot more reliable.
And I mean, we've been seeing a lot of that in Runeterra, and I really like to see that, right? Like, see champions just come back in cards that haven't been played much, and then the meta shifts and people discover them, and there's just always new things to discover, and builds are always improving, and it's really cool to see the contextual value of cards change with new expansions that aren't from the new expansion. I always really enjoy seeing that.
Yeah, definitely. Cards like Spirit Leech and Fading Icon have really just powered up some of these old cards and are just, perfect fits. Yeah,
and these decks can also slant really aggressively as well. The SI Shurima Shell is just really powerful. And I was saying to Simon, I died on turn 3 this morning just to a point of basically playing a lot of June Keepers. And that they had no burn. They just played like dude. They didn't even play anything on turn 2.
Unreal.
They just hit me for 7 on turn 1 and then 13 on turn 3, and I was just like, oh, okay, that's that game done with. The Shurima's really been integrating well with a lot of the existing classes and pulling out new synergies, and it's just fantastic to see. Junekeeper's one, I really wish we'd put that in our top 10, because I know that card is like an all-star to me.
We were thinking about it, yeah.
And I mean, for the first time I saw it and envisioned myself taking 4 damage on turn 1, I just knew that that's not something that I ever wanted to happen, and it was going to happen a lot. Yeah, definitely.
I think one other point about this deck as well, just in relation to sort of how it's placed in the meta, at the moment, there isn't that much Hush running around. There aren't really that many copies of, Vengeance or Harsh Winds or other ways to interrupt the Atrocity win as well. So I think that's also helping Nasus at the moment.
Yeah, I think Targon as a region struggles with TF Fizz. And so I think if that deck gets nerfed, maybe we'll see Targon pick back up. And also Targon's still reeling from the Aphelios nerf. And so, like you said, there's not much Hush at the moment, which is definitely something that's quite strong against Nasus. Although that said, there is a lot of freeze at the moment, which is similar effects. People are playing a lot of Three Sisters, which is a really powerful card.
Yeah, Three Sisters has been good. I think it's been getting cut a little bit lately, but it's still in the meta, but keep an eye on it.
Yeah. All right. The last deck that we're going to talk about, and this is one that we don't have a particularly good list for this one. You've just pulled it off the mobalytics tier list, and of the decks, I'd recommend playing, learning, trying different versions of the 4 decks we've mentioned so far. This deck, I probably wouldn't mention picking up any of the versions. I mean, like, obviously, if you want to try it, play it, but I haven't been really impressed either playing the deck or against the deck. It's the Concurrent Timelines combo deck. And so there's a wide range of... For those that don't know the combo, you play Concurrent Timelines, which has an effect that for the rest of the game, the first follower that you play each turn, you get to pick from a random selection of 3 followers that have the same mana cost, and it enters the battlefield with as that body instead of its original body. And the combo is that you play Commander Ledros, and then you have a 60%, I think, chance to hit the Dreadway. And so Commander Ledros comes into play, puts its trigger on the stack, turns into the Dreadway, and then instead of doing half of your opponent's life, it deals all of your opponent's life. And so it's sort of a 2-card combo, which about 60% of the time that you find Ledros and Concurrent Timelines will kill your opponent from any life total. But yeah, which is definitely a powerful interaction, but and maybe it's just the shells haven't gotten there yet, but it does ask some amount from you. You know, you've got to be Shadow Wiles and Piltover to play both of those cards, and the shells just haven't impressed me so far. I don't think I've died to the combo, maybe once. And I think the one time I played it, I was playing the mirror, which isn't really sort of useful testing from a how good is this deck perspective. It's one people have been complaining about a lot, but yeah, I haven't seen that much of it. When I have seen it, it just hasn't impressed me. Some of the builds skew really heavily creature based, so trying to get a bunch of those value out of timelines, playing things like Chump Wump and Blighted Caretaker and Spirit Leech, using powerful enter the battlefield effects to then try and get bigger bodies and sort of get that value leading up to the Commander Ledros. And some of them are more akin to the old Karina control decks and playing essentially creatureless. I play versions where Ledros and or Karina are your only creatures, and so you get no value out of timelines until you get up to that combo kill. But yeah, I don't know. What are your feelings on this deck?
Yeah, it's definitely a deck where at the moment I feel like the shell is really letting it down. So I prefer the creature-based decks over the heavy control lists. The heavy control lists have a lot of trouble against the aggro decks at the moment, and I think if you are running Concurrent Timelines, it makes sense to try to get more value out of it than just going for the combo finish. So I think I prefer the heavy creature builds. One thing that I will mention about a combo like this, so I've seen a lot of people complaining about this on Twitter and saying it's not good for the game, saying it's not fun. Personally, I don't think it's that big of an issue right now, but if the shell became really good, I could definitely see it being something that might need to be touched. So for instance, I could see this deck being really, really good if the Concurrent Timelines Ledros finish was just like a supplementary win condition. It's essentially, I've got this great deck, it wins all these different ways, and then if I ever get to turn 9, you've got to have a way to interact with this potential win that I have. But at the moment, I feel like the list kind of relies on the Commander Ledros win a little bit too much. And because of that, I think it's ultimately fine. There are a few different ways to sort of interact with that, at least temporarily. And I think another way to beat the deck is just sort of going under it and beating it before it gets to that finish. But I can see why people are frustrated playing against this.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of ways to interact with it. Like you said, you can kill your opponent. They can not draw both pieces of the combo, and then even when they do it, they only have a 60% chance of killing you. And you can kill the Dreadway with the trigger on the stack. You can deny or right. What's the new force of the right of?
Yeah, right of negation.
You can right of negation. Yeah, you can hush it. Like, there's a lot of. I just feel like, if your deck can't kill your opponent before turn 9 and can't deal with a 4/8 creature and can't deal with an ability, and maybe you will lose like 60% of the games against this deck when they draw both their combo pieces. And I just don't know if that's just like a lot of hoops. And compared to like Feel the Rush, for example, which was one card, and if you didn't have exactly deny basically or some other there are some other little things you do, you just lost on the spot. Like it just doesn't feel to me like this is anywhere near that level of oppressive on the metagame or toxic. And another thing is just, like I said, I haven't seen this deck much. I don't feel like, if every single game I was playing, I was losing to getting Ledros from Timelines, that's no good. I'm pretty annoyed by that. But yeah, I'm not even seeing, I just don't think people are playing it. Like, we couldn't even find a list we really liked because people aren't playing and sharing their getting to Masters with this deck, and so I just don't think it's very good.
Yeah, I would agree. It feels like it's on the weaker side at the moment. It definitely can do some very powerful things, and I've played against this deck where, it's played a turn 1 copy of Concurrent Timelines, and then it's just played all of these insane value creatures, just hit these, huge bodies. I had an opponent who played the Chempunk, the 5/2 for 5 mana that deals 1 to all units. They played that. They just killed my board and turned it into a Screeching Dragon and like ate my Azir. And just like, so it can definitely do some ridiculous things. And then in that game, they killed me on turn 9 with the Ledros combo. They didn't need to, but they did. And it's definitely one of those decks that can feel bad to play against. It's got some ridiculous nut draws, but so many decks in Legends of Runeterra have that. So
and you were turn 9 playing Azir, like you were already dead against any deck.
No, come on. None of that.
No, but that deck is trying to win the game considerably before turn 9.
Oh, but I mean, you can moose someone out turn 11, turn 12. No shame in that.
But yeah, so and like I said, I could definitely see this getting to a stage where I'm like, nah, this is oppressive. It needs to get nerfed. But I think at the moment that, and maybe the people that are complaining about this are just seeing a different metagame to I am and are playing against this a lot and getting ranched. But from what I've seen, it feels nowhere near something that I'm complaining about. Unless I was like really invested in this deck, and then I'd be complaining that it sucks and it needs some buffs.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. This is definitely one that, lists are going to change a lot for this, and as people spend more time and refine it and look for some combinations, who knows, it might become more of an issue. But at the moment, I'm reasonably okay with it. In terms of where to point nerfs, I think it's much more reasonable to be looking at Twisted Fate.
And another thing to remember is like how often, if you're losing against your opponent casting Ledros and kill it and into Dreadway on turn 9, how many of those games are you losing where they just cast Ledros? Like you said, they combo killed you, but it didn't matter. Like, how many times? Because Ledros is like, it's a game-ending card.
Yeah, definitely. There are games where that'll happen, but this is just an interesting deck, and we thought it was worth talking about this week. Yeah,
and so as far as, the meta as a whole, like we sort of said, the big boogeyman of TF Fizz is really Tate still just going strong, taking things over. I think if I was going to recommend a deck that you played on ladder, if you just wanted to climb, you didn't care about new cards or anything, then you can't really go past TF Fizz. It's just so good, even though I played it a lot yesterday and lost heaps and got angry. Also, Old Stalwart Fiora Shen has an obscene win rate and is just silently doing a lot of work. I played that last night and it feels really good.
Yeah, Fiora Shen is still quite strong. If I had to recommend a deck, it would be TF Aphelios. It preys on Fiora Shen. It's also pretty good against a lot of the new decks. I used that to hit Masters yesterday, so...
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
71st Masters on NA.
Yeah, not bad. So yeah, pretty happy with that. It kind of struggles a bit against TF Fizz. The matchup has sort of been 50-50 in the past. That extra point of toughness going on Aphelios does actually hurt quite a bit now that Aphelios dies to Gold Card or Mystic Shot rather than having to actually eat the 3 damage spell. That does hurt the matchup quite a bit. And yeah, in general, I think TF Fizz is ahead in that matchup now, but I think TF Aphelios is good enough against a lot of the field, and it could just sort of win against anything as well. So I would strongly recommend that. I think we're planning on doing our next deck guide on TF Aphelios, so keep an ear out for that.
Yeah, that might be next week. Yeah, so keep your ears peeled. And just another thing about Fiora Shen is if you're seeing a lot of Azir decks, Fiora Shen just destroys the Azir decks. They make all these 1/1 units, and it's so bad for them.
Yeah, when they just can't even attack because you just get a huge advantage. You're going to Fiora kill them. Yeah, definitely.
It's so rough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are a few decks, and then the first sort of 3 or 4 decks we talked about also really good recommendations. Just looking over some stats at the moment, I'd recommend people stop playing Azir Rennington. That deck is one of the most played decks and has a 42% win rate. So, probably say don't pick that one up. Ashe has a really high win rate at the moment. I think that Ashe got some really good new tools in this patch, and also the meta's just sort of shifted a bit, and a lot of those big decks that prey on Ashe have fallen off, and so it's in a pretty good spot. But yeah, basically the meta's just great at the moment. Obviously TF Fizz does suck. People are sick of it. No one likes queuing up and seeing it. But apart from that, and even with that, I'm still really enjoying this meta.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they've done a really good job. And obviously it's still week 1, so, in a month we might not, be seeing the same things. There might be a few issues here, but, jump in, enjoy the meta while you can.
Yeah, it's a great time at the moment. People have an all-starters gravitate towards the decks, and even though Runeterra never gets the metas as honed in as Magic does sometimes, where there's only 3 decks played in Standard, it'll never be that homogenized in Runeterra. But yeah, the meta's really open at the moment. People are playing a lot of really different things. I'm just really enjoying all my different games. Buried Sun Disc not showing up a lot.
Yeah, just to go back, so that Renekton Azir list, is that a Buried Sun Disc list?
Yeah, I did just notice, that is, because I wasn't sure what it was, but and it always tricks me because mobalytics never lists 3 champions in the decks. Actually, no, this deck does only have 2 champions, but yeah, that is a Buried Sun Disc Azir Renekton list, which is not really. I played against it in my first game of the expansion, and I haven't seen Buried Sun Disc again since. Yeah,
it seems sweet, but it's just not really worth it.
One region's tough,
Yeah, one region's tough, and one of the big risks with the deck that I didn't realize when I first was thinking about it is, they can kill your Buried Sun Disc before you flip it, and you only run one, and if they just Solari Priestess and get a Comet and obliterate it, you you just add a really big vulnerability to your deck. So
yeah, it's rough.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. The top 5 decks from the new expansion for us, and like we said, Runeterra's sweet at the moment. Get in there and play some games. And all right, we'll catch you next week, possibly for our Twisted Fate Aphelios deck guy, going over how Simon got to Masters with that delight of a deck.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And as always, if you want to get in touch with us, chat with us, you can follow us on Twitter at Maitland Cameron and at Winterberry, or follow the podcast itself at Runetalker Pod. And also there are some links there to join the Discord. So we've had a lot of people join the Discord recently. It's been very active, and it's been great to see. So if you want to come in, chat about Legends of Runeterra, and all try to learn together, that's a great spot to do it. Yeah,
there's a lot of lists being posted, a lot of conversations being had. Haven't been able to contribute the last couple of days as much as I'd like. I'll get on there tonight and respond to some things. Work's been busy, but it's like you said, it's been great to see some people get in there and chat about the game, which is just in such a great spot at the moment. So, all right. Thanks everyone for listening as always, and we will be back next week.